Hi Josh, how are you?
Good, Rachel. How are you?
Doing great. So I'm gonna pull a reference that I don't know if you're going to know or appreciate, but this felt like a the adult version of Cats and Dogs, a movie I
Uh-huh.
used to love as a kid. And
Absolutely.
but for you, when you are dealing with actual animals that are then looking like they are talking to each other, what is kind of the fun for you as a director of making that not look so out of place? Like when Will Ferrell was talking as Reggie, I was not it wasn't uncanny valley, like it was kind of
Good.
fitting.
Yeah, good. Okay, good. Well, that works. Yeah, I mean, it's on some level, it's really fun and freeing, right? Where as a director, like it was almost in the animated space where I could kind of choose ideally wherever I wanted my actors to go. I love working with actors, but sometimes, right, when you're blocking a scene, you run into that thing where they're like, I don't want to sit here. I want to sit over there. I don't want to walk over here
Mhm.
on this line. I want to stand on, and it's all part of the creative process. This film, there was none of that. I just had to decide where every dog was at any given point, and you get to make those calls. The challenging part is once I've made that plan of the blocking and how to see how we visualize and shoot the scene, now we have to figure out how to execute it. And then that's less fun because it's really hard. There's four dogs in almost every scene in my movie, and
Mhm.
that's what makes it really complicated. And every dog has two trainers, a lead trainer that they kind of are looking to for eye lines and all of that. So it becomes a very, very complicated kind of puzzle or chess match of who can stand where, who's on camera, who can't. But I loved it. I mean, I found it really fun and kind of freeing. And I obviously made the sort of challenge and mess for myself because I said I really want to work and shoot this with real dogs, so it feels incredibly real. Um, I think like I like some of those, and by the way, I love Cats and Dogs. One of my producers, Aditya Sood, produced that, was a producer on that film, so he'll love that shout
Perfect.
out. I obviously loved Homeward Bound and older kind of films as well that I remember from my childhood. But I think for children, it's like it's easy to go along with a full CG dog or a really overly anthropomorphized animated kind of look. And I felt like for adult audiences, which this film is obviously targeted to,
Yeah.
um, we're a little more critical, right? We're a little more cynical, a little more critical, and like anything that pulls me out and doesn't feel like a real dog can pull you out of the film. And I really didn't want that to happen. So I'm glad to hear that you didn't experience the kind of uncanny valley. It just felt like you're watching a dog who happens to talk like Will Ferrell.
Well, and it also got me like I have a pet cat, and so I was watching this and had to stop and go find my cat because when Reggie is like realizing that he's abandoned, I was like, I want to fight Will Forte, who I do genuinely like, but I
Love.
want to fight this man. Grounding that though in like the reality that this dog finds out he's abandoned and has
Yeah.
to then kind of like come to terms with that, does that make it easier or harder for you to try and like make these dogs that you are making talk have the necessary emotions that they
Emotions.
do? Yeah.
Yeah, it does. I mean, it makes it harder to answer your question, but I love that challenge. And we go to the movies to feel things, right? To feel
Mhm.
emotions, to go on an emotional ride. And so one of the very first things I did is sat with my animal training team to learn just what my tools were. How far could they help me take performances? To give you an example, Reggie has like 7 different types of walks, let alone jogs or runs. So if you think about the way a human being walks, like the way we carry ourselves tells you a lot about my emotional state. Am I
Mhm.
head up, shoulders high? Am I kind of slunk down, walking slowly? And so you needed to do all that with a dog, so that for each scene. And so I was amazed with the performances that my trainers were able to pull out. And then, of course, occasionally we would lean on visual effects or CG here and there, but I tried to keep that to a minimum and really primarily use the CG for two things: to make them talk, because we were unsuccessful in training the dogs to talk, and also to anytime the dogs couldn't do a behavior or it was unsafe for them to do a behavior, it would become a
Mhm.
full CG dog. So we have a sequence involving an eagle. It was like, well, we're not going to have real dogs around a bird of prey. So yeah, it was, the emotion was everything to me. That's a big reason why I love the film is it's so outrageous, so loud, so funny, but really it's ultimately about, you know, being in an unhealthy toxic relationship and how do you get out of it, and how your friends help you through times like that, and how you find your sense of self-worth. And all
Mhm.
of that I wanted to convey, as well through dogs, which yes is challenging, but I was blown away with what we were able to get from the dogs themselves.
I was gonna ask you a question about like kind of the outrageousness of it because like I love Barb and Star Go to Vista Del Mar.
Oh,
It
thank
was
you.
one of my favorite things to that I watched in the pandemic. But
Yeah.
I always think about like the outrageousness of Edgar's Prayer, and now this has the outrageousness of like a bunch of dogs getting drunk. And so, what is it for you about that kind of humor and the like just a touch over like
Yeah.
something completely like off the rails that you like to include in your movies?
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. I mean, I love absurdity. I think life is pretty absurd, and so
Mhm.
I find that like films and art that remind us of that can be really helpful as we like work through life and it's hard and it's like, oh, right, I can just sit and laugh at this ridiculous film for an hour and a half and remember that life is really silly and funny. So I love that element of anything I'm working on. And then at the same time, yeah, I do want to kind of ground it in reality. I do want it to say something. As I think
Mhm.
the best kind of comedies for me are the ones that I went in for the ridiculous, loud, whatever, R-rated jokes, and all of a sudden I'm completely emotionally invested in the story. I thought a lot about 40-Year-Old Virgin, and Bridesmaids and Superbad and all these kind of films that they definitely delivered the outrageousness, the laughs, but like what really set them apart and made me call my best friend after and say, "You got to go watch this," is because they had an emotional heart, they had a center, and they were about something. So this film kind of let me do both, which is my favorite thing to do.
Yeah, and it is exciting to kind of have comedies back. Like I study comedy,
Totally.
love comedic movies growing up. I feel like we've kind of like stopped making those so much.
Yeah.
And now you have two great ones back to back. For you though, like, is that the genre that you are the most comfortable in? Is like bringing comedies to life, or is there something else you also want to try and do?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I've always just gravitated toward comedy. I love to watch them. I was always kind of joking around my whole life, so it just felt natural. So,
Mhm.
unfortunately, the voice in my head, if I'm watching or reading something serious, is kind of like, what if you said this? It'd be funny. Like, so that's
Gotcha.
hard to turn off. But I'm sure, I work in documentary as well, and I try to make those funny. That doesn't mean that documentaries can't be funny. So I try to make those funny as well. But I'm sure as like any artist, as I grow, my taste will change. Each film you make informs, the
Mhm.
next one you do. And, I jokingly called Kristen Wiig and Annie Momolo and said, guys, you are so terrible on set that I'm now just working with dogs. So, which is of course not true. They're the most lovely people, and dear friends. But yeah, I think I'll probably stick around with trying to make people laugh for as long as I can, and then go do something else when I can't.
And I love it. But for our last question, I do have to ask. Obviously, I'm obsessed with like who is cast as these dogs.
Yeah,
Genuinely think it's funny that Jamie Foxx is a little Boston Terrier, and I love that Randall Park is like a huge Great
huge.
Dane. But for you, what was like this? I don't know how you feel about these dogs, but what was like your favorite dog to get to sit with and like play around with on set? Because I know they are professional dogs,
Yes.
but you
I
guys probably had fun.
We had a ton of fun. I mean, you can look in the behind the scenes footage. I'm often holding a dog while I'm directing the scene because we had lots of dogs. We had day player dogs would come in for one scene. We had one dog whose entire job, so there was like four bugs. So when you have Bug back here, right, Jamie
Mhm.
Foxx's dog, there's a lead dog who's most of the time, that's Benny, who you can see there. But then
Mhm.
there's three other dogs you would use. There was a dog named Enzo whose only job, his one skill he could do was biting sprinklers. So
So
he
that's
was
me.
with us the whole shoot. He came out one night for like 5 minutes, and they turned us because you can't train that. Dogs either like to bite sprinklers or not. He came out, he crushed it, he bit the sprinkler like a madman, and we all were like, well done, Enzo. And then he left, and he didn't have to work for the rest of the movie. So he was probably the best. I don't know. I love them all. It's a very difficult question to ask, like, who's your favorite kid? I will admit that I tended to find myself saddling up next to Hunter, who is Randall Park's Great Dane.
I
He
love that dog.
was he was so sweet. He was very difficult when we started filming. He had none of three of the four dogs had no training. So yeah, before we started the movie. So he would often like was being, not a good boy, even though he was sweet, but he was not sitting or he wasn't staying. He would get the zoomies and run around the set and crash into things with his cone on. And something about that just won me over, even though it was frustrating. I was like, I just love this guy. So maybe he, if I had to pick one, he was probably my favorite most days. But at the same time, I was very frustrated with him other days when he wasn't acting as he was supposed to.
I love that because I love that
Yeah.
dog. Thank you so much for your time. I
Yeah.
love
Thank
this
you.
movie. It's so much fun, and I can't wait for people to see it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Great talking with you.
Awesome, thanks.